Hello and welcome to Phil and Ted's Sexy Boomer Show. I'm Ted Bonnet.
And that means that by process of elimination, I am Phil Proctor. Still, my birthday's coming up, however, so I'll be a new Phil Proctor on July 28th. So
Happy birthday, Phil.
Not there yet. You can happy unbirthday me as long as you want.
Every Tuesday we're here at W.
At W.
There's a reason I went there, but we'll explain that in a minute.
We'll explain it in a minute.
KPFK every Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and you can hear us also as a podcast on our website at sexyboomershow.com.
We're screaming. We're screaming all the time.
Yes, we are. And speaking of screaming all the time, did you see in New York today that Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, the number 3 man in the government chain of command, was outside the New York courtroom of Trump's criminal trial, defending him in a hush money porn star.
Shh, quiet, hush money. Shh. Yeah, well, it's a new world, isn't it?
And Vance and
Schwarmanaki Knockers, yes.
Yeah, he was there, and
his name is Smarmy Knockers.
It's shocking. It's shocking. I mean, we can't accept this as a new normal. And yet we are.
It is.
It's wild.
We're through the looking glass.
Speaking of new normals, I'm become a big fan of YouTube. Who knew?
Of my tube? Oh,
no, YouTube.
Oh,
YouTube.
Oh, I see.
Which, incidentally, I read a stat just today that now 10% of all television watching is YouTube. That's
10%, huh?
Yeah, of all TV watching is YouTube. That's why the legacy networks are falling apart.
Yeah.
And why Netflix.
The legacy networks on their last legs. But, talking about radio and talking about fruition, I think it's time to introduce our guest for today. So this will give you a hint.
This is WHFS, Bethesda, Maryland, 102.3 FM. It's 5 minutes after 9 o'clock. My name's Adele.
Oh, it's so soothing.
Hi, Adele.
Hi, Adele.
Adele Abrams, our wonderful guest today, a young lady whom I met at the Mill Valley Film Festival when we were both attending a documentary that we both appeared in called Feast Your Ears. And it's the story of the progressive radio station WHFS, High Fidelity Sound.
I hear claims that it was the very first progressive radio station.
Adele was the DJ, by the way.
Hi. Is that true?
Well, there were certainly other types of progressive stations up in New York, for example, and I grew up in the New York area. So, I remember listening to WNEW, WPLJ, White Port Lemon Juice, and also WMMR from Philadelphia.
The Big Murmur.
Back in my college days, early 70s, they were playing a lot of the same music that WHFS was playing, and this is when I was a listener because I was going to University of Maryland. I was down in the D.C. area.
You were hitchhiking.
I was hitchhiking around very much. Back in those days, somehow I didn't get axe murdered, which is still kind of amazing to me. So I would listen to WHFS, and then if I went up to New Jersey, New York, I would hear some of the same music being played on these other stations. And this is now, again, I was a college DJ, but it was before I was on WHFS.
Yeah.
But what we were doing, or what they were doing on HFS and eventually me, with the music was quite different. We were doing expanded sets. We were mixing the genres quite a bit more. So there was a nexus of commonality in the rock and roll, the underground, freeform, progressive rock. But it was the way, I think, that the WHFS DJs integrated other types of music. I would play, Vaughan Williams, St. Martin's of the Field classical music and segue it into Ralph Towner and Oregon, and somehow I'd end up maybe with Emmylou Harris.
Well,
but there would be a thread of continuity.
And the reason why we met and the reason why I am in the documentary is because they played a Fireside Theater record on the air late at night, I assume. Don't Crush That Door, hand me the pliers. And they chose some guy called up because he was offended by the following scene. Porgy says to Mudhead, "Gee, Mudhead, I gotta go. I'll be late for the Philatelist Club." And then Mudhead says, "Gosh, Porgy, I didn't know you masturbated." All right, well, laugh. You might laugh, but some guy called up and was offended by this, and some DJ lost her job, right? And they paid a fine.
It was actually...
This is all in the movie, by the way.
It's an interesting story because they complained to the FCC about it.
What year was this?
And this was in 1969.
Even that's dirty.
At that time, WHFS was not a freeform progressive station, but they sold time blocks to a group called Spirit is Cheese, which included it was three individuals who were all Bard College graduates, and Sarah, Mark, and Josh Brooks were the three. They actually ended up being good friends with Steely Dan, and that's another whole story.
The Big Cheese.
But Sarah, they brokered the time and they sold their own ads. So they were very popular. And Sarah, played this full side of the album.
Full side of the album, wow.
Because it had just come in, I think even without listening to it. And that was what was the genesis of that complaint. And
what time of day?
It was overnight. It was late.
But overnights were sort of off limits.
I know, it's all stupid,
as I've told Phil, I will cop to having played the George Carlin
7
words you can't say on radio on my radio show when I was doing overnights, and
nobody
dodged the
about
bullet
that,
there.
Yeah.
But in any case, so Jake, the owner of WHFS, fired Sarah, and Mark Gorblew, he was quit in solidarity. Josh Brooks stayed with the station, and he's in the movie quite a bit. He was one of the longest DJs there in the end. But that planted the seed.
He's the
with
longest
Jake.
playing DJ.
Hey, instead of brokering the time and letting them make money selling the ads, I'll just take their format idea and roll it out. And so by the time I arrived in Maryland in fall of 1970, WHFS was already doing some progressive music. And that was what I listened to in college.
Yeah.
Then I got into college radio, and, as they say, R&D, rip off and duplicate. I'd hear songs and segues on there and go, I could do that.
Why did they make the documentary?
Jay Schlossberg.
Jay Schlossberg, who as a teen had worked there very briefly, I think as a janitor, but he was a big fan.
Oh, as a janitor? I didn't know that.
I'll tell you why they made it. There was a story to tell here, and part of that was
It's a great story.
How HFS connected the community. It was really, the heartbeat of the D.C. area. And I can tell you, I lived in a group house that I could walk to the station, because everybody lived in group houses, hippie stuff back then.
Yeah.
And when we looked for places to live, you had to be able to get a clear signal to HFS. It was a criteria. And then when we interviewed people to move into the house, they had to be HFS listeners because we didn't want any of that other crap streaming through our house.
The only way you could afford to live and be a DJ at that time was to be in a group house.
There were 5 of us, and one of the other people in the house, Mark Avery, who's also passed away, he was one of the people there. He was kind of the Venus flytrap of HFS.
Well, now, you must have been just an infant if all these people are dying.
I was raised by wolves. I graduated college at 20, and I had already 3 years of radio experience on WMUC at Maryland.
Yeah.
But literally, I was 10 years younger than everybody else at the station when I started there, and we talk about this in the movie, and this may resonate with you, Ted, that as one of the youngest staff members on the air, when the new wave movement started, I really latched on to that. I was digging it. I was going out and seeing, Dave Edmonds and Elvis Costello and, B-52s and Blondie and, some of the more esoteric things in the clubs. And the guys, and I say guys because really for a lot of my time on HFS, I was the only female on the air. They, were kind of stuck back in more of the folk rock and the 60s stuff. And I would mix the newer music in with the older music.
Right. So the older guys were into the older music, and you, as the youngest person, brought in the youngest.
And yet
music.
there was a vibrant scene in D.C. with D.C. Space and the 930 Club.
The Atlantis Club even before that. I remember going to see, some of the shows over there. And we had a nascent punk scene in D.C. that ended up, Dave Grohl was in there. Henry Rollins was in there. Beto O'Rourke played in a punk band out of D.C. for a while. So, there was a lot going on.
Fugazi and Laurie Anderson.
I loved Laurie Anderson. And so I was playing that stuff on the air where some of the others, maybe were more reticent. And there was also a college station, WGTB, which was Georgetown station, and they were heavy on the punk and the new wave. And we were losing some listeners to that.
It did. To tell you, I listened to it during those days, and it sounded a little dated and a little soft, and it was missing that edge. And by the late 70s, a lot of us that were at WRNW, the last freeform station in New York, we went to WPIX, where we became Elvis to Elvis. It was Elvis
Costello, Elvis Presley.
Elvis Presley, and it was, again...
And Elvis is everywhere, we know that. Rest in peace, Mojo Nixon.
So there was a huge advancement in the late 70s. It was a really interesting time for music.
Yeah. So, to me, that was a very exciting time. I could really mix it up. I remember seeing Patti Smith on her first tour. But for some of the older-time listeners of HFS, hearing her, doing Gloria, or Horses on the radio, that was a bit jarring for them, I think, when they were used to hearing us playing the McGarrigle Sisters and the Roaches. So, again, it was a fun time of transition. And then when HFS was sold, the new station in Annapolis at 99.1, we were kind of told, stick to rock. Now, I would still mix the things in that I liked, but, it was no longer really encouraged to maybe play 40 minutes of folk music.
Well, that was by the end of the 70s, it was really over.
Yeah.
Because everything became much more formatted with the new wave, and, there was just a higher energy. It was almost akin to top 40 in terms of the rotations. It was just it was a different feel
if the
entirely.
records weren't free, we'd be all news.
But in terms of HFS being really the last of the independents rather than necessarily the first, I think we were, because really right up through 1983 when it was sold, we were still playing whatever we wanted. At that point, I had never been told you have to play this, you can't play this, other than the 7 words you can't say on radio. Sorry about that, dudes. But we could play comedy. We could play spoken word. We could play jazz. We could play classical. I personally love Irish and English traditional music. So, you might tune in and hear me playing, Matty Pryor or Planksty or, Turnanog or any kind of things. But we'd integrate it in.
Love it.
We came up at a time where we became very spoiled, because when it ended and we had come up in freeform radio, everything else was institutionalized.
It was like cold turkey.
And it was awful. It was like, what are you going to do? You're not going to stick around. There's some people that are still doing it, like Meg Griffin, who I worked with, still a dear friend. She went over to Sirius XM.
Yeah, Carol Miller was on there as well.
Carol Miller, too. And, for example, if you have Sirius XM, go to something called The Loft, and you will hear a traditional freeform FM sound, XMU Discovery, more new stuff. But it's out there, but it's far and few between.
When people have asked me, is there anything out there like HFS today? My response is yes, if you take one part Little Steven's Underground Garage, one part the Spectrum, one part the Loft, and maybe I'll add a fourth component of the classic vinyl. If you threw that all in a blender, that would kind of mimic what HFS
or
was
college
like.
radio. College radio sort of maintained it. You still can hear here in town, KXLU. There are still stations that are doing that.
I want to express my connection to WHFS and why we're even in the movie, because Procter & Bergman used to perform pretty regularly in Georgetown at a place called the Cellar Door. Great club that attracted every musician, from Jimmy Buffett to Stevie Wonder, and all the amazing. And she has cajoled me into doing a personal appearance as the host of an evening from the Cellar Door that is basically to help emerging artists along the way. And the name of the charity is?
Yeah, it's good to mention it. It's the After Dark Fund, and it was started basically around COVID because so many musicians lost their livelihoods.
Lost their gigs,
and as we all know, being a rock and roll musician is well known for all the benefits you get in terms of. So you had older boomer musicians who had their legs cut out from them economically, and they had health issues and couldn't pay the bills or they couldn't make rent. And so the After Dark Fund contributes to that. It's a pool of money. They have helped out, I think, over 150 musicians now in various types of support that they need.
Great.
So these Cellar Door shows, the Cellar Door Club closed. It's a Starbucks now, rest in peace.
Isn't everything?
But it's at a club called the Hamilton, which hosts a lot of types of music
all right.
that the Cellar Door might have.
This is going to happen on the evening of June 15th. I will be back in the AC/DC area. All right, and I'll be kicking around there. The next day I'm doing a radio interview with Adele, our guest Adele Abrams. And I don't know what terrible questions she's going to ask me. But
and that is a public radio station, WOWD, out of Tacoma Park, Maryland, which, Ted, as you know, you never get rid of the bug. So I've been doing occasional guest shows on there now.
Oh, good.
So the show that we're going to be doing with Phil is not my show, but it's the one I occasionally guest on. And the host of that, Robbie White, it's called Forbidden Alliance. It's a great HFS-type show. He's asked me to do the interview with Phil. So
if you want to know more about it, if you're in the D.C. area or will be there, it's the afterdarkfund.org. theafterdarkfund.org.
And I'll be there on June 15th. I think I've convinced Adele to kind of be there with me because she knows so much about the musical groups, and all I know about is being funny.
How is the scene in D.C. these days for music?
I
hear 930 Club expanded and is up in
They expanded. Dave Grohl, in fact, kicked off. They've named the expansion the Atlantis in honor of the original site of the 930 Club on F Street. It was 930 F Street.
Yeah.
And so they're booking a lot of things. There are a lot of clubs that have emerged. The Anthem, which is right down on the waterfront and on Main Avenue in D.C., is a big club. They're bringing in a lot of national talent. Of course, we have our outdoor arenas, but the Hamilton is good. And then, I was talking about this with Phil earlier. There's a phenomenon happening that I would love to see spread around the country. And first of all, a lot of the boomer age musicians that I knew as young men and women in the 1970s, they are still playing, and they're reforming in bands, and they're playing at places like the Elks Club and the Knights of Columbus, big dance halls where they're doing original and cover music. But the other thing is that they've started having some matinee shows, like 2 to 5 in the afternoon.
Senior matinees.
And
wheelchair accessible.
It's great. For those maybe who have trouble driving at night, but you still like to shake your groove thing out there.
And the music is loud enough that you can check your hearing aids at the door.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I think that's great. And they're filling these shows. They're selling out. And it's really rebuilt kind of this musical community that we had with many of the same people in the 1970s, including local artists that we played on HFS, because that was always one of my big things was promoting local music, and I later did it in my TV show as well. So it's all come back around, and I'm having a blast when I'm there. I go out to these shows, and I'm seeing old faces that maybe we are older faced, but we're still having a ball. And I think clubs, if they want, think about it. You can turn the house twice. You can serve a lunch meal as well as having dinner food.
You can eat buffet.
Meal service.
The early bird specials,
Did you want applesauce with that applesauce?
What kind of birds are you going to have?
And I will add, there also this one club, which is in Rockville, Maryland, Hank Deedles. They also have an extensive selection of non-alcoholic beers because, again, a lot of older people who go to clubs are taking medications they shouldn't be drinking.
By the mid-'80s, when the club scene in New York sort of died out, late 80s, you know where the action was? AA meetings. I couldn't believe it. A friend of mine was in AA. Because back in the club days, it was all cocaine. And
ladies and gentlemen, Adele Abrams, AA, is now celebrating her 30th year of sobriety.
Congratulations.
Well, I like to say, I see a lot of my old friends in the meetings.
Of course.
I'll put it that way while remaining, with anonymity here. But it's true. I mean, so many of the people I knew and ran with,
Yeah.
if they aren't dead, they're clean and sober now.
For like 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
But this was in the late 80s, so my friend said, you got to come down. It's like, because I missed the dance clubs, like Danceteria, all these places we would dance all night. So I go to the basement of a church in the village, in New York, in the West Village. And there are like 300 people there, and the music's great, and everybody's dancing. And instead of liquor, there were like it was potluck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, but yeah, that's a fairly,
It was
a fairly
great.
big tradition, of having the meals and all. But I will tell you this: up until I like to say BC, before COVID, I used to DJ the holiday parties for the Washington area, Silver Spring area, recovery parties. And there'd be, several hundred people there. And I'd rent a sound system and bring my records and my CD. And, this was long after I stopped being a DJ. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I would have such a blast doing that, and I would get my juices running. I want to do this again.
Well, when you
I had already moved on to, I wouldn't say a real career, but a different career.
And you're listening to Phil and Ted's Sexy Boomer Show here every Tuesday here at 1 o'clock. I'm your co-host, Ted Bonnet.
I'm the other co-host. No, I'm your host. That means I'm your host, Phil Proctor, because you just said you're the co-host.
Okay.
But I'm the co-ghost.
And we're here every Tuesday, and you can listen to all these fabulous shows that we do on our website at sexyboomershow.com.
That's all I do with my spare time.
Yes. Our guest today, Adele Abrams, an old-school progressive FM DJ that
who is now
now is a safety crusader.
Yes, you after you DJ'd, you put yourself through law school, right?
I went to law school at night for 4 years of hard labor while I was working full-time, not as a DJ, but I had transitioned into more of a government affairs type of job, which encompassed working on safety issues, dealing with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And I was working labor issues, I was working environmental, but out of all of those, the workplace safety and health really resonated with me. So I started self-educating and eventually got 2 safety certifications, but also went to law school at night.
You're a member of multiple state bars and federal courts, including the U.S.
She can't go to bars anymore.
the U.S. Supreme Court.
I do.
Do you argue at the Supreme Court?
I argue with a lot of their decisions in my head, I'll tell you that. But I am admitted to practice before the Supreme Court. I have had one case go up there on a writ of certiorari, and they denied the certiorari, so we never got to argue the case. But I do practice at the federal Court of Appeals level fairly frequently.
We were talking about this at lunch, and what you're doing is really fascinating because safety at the workplace now has always been an issue, but it's no less of an issue now. I mean, I think probably the most publicized issues are warehouse workers because it's such a big thing now, and the way they literally tag these workers and watch their every movement, and if they stop to cough, there's a demotion. I mean, it's that micromanaged now through technology. Plus, they're in this great hurry, and they're moving large items, and there are a lot of people moving at the same time, all in a rush. It's got to be a recipe for injuries.
The warehousing and logistics industry is now and has become one of the more hazardous industries. It's probably akin to construction and mining at this point.
And you're an expert in mining safety, and you're saying this.
And I do work with some companies in this arena, and I'm very well aware of the hazards. Now, the federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, just last year launched a warehouse national emphasis program. So they are targeting those workplaces more frequently. And, robotics is part of it, the speed, the productivity measures. Those are definitely, hazards. People getting hit by forklifts and moving machines, unstable shelving, loading of trucks. I handled a case, a year ago where a new worker, first day on the job, got crushed at the pelvis, where his supervisor was training him, backed the truck up into him and pinned him, between the loading dock, and he lost all use of his lower body.
Good God.
The sad thing about that case, and it was in Texas, they did a tox screen. He had a low level but positive test for cannabis, and as a result, he was cut off literally and figuratively at the knees because he got no workers' comp.
Isn't that
and was summarily fired.
Oh my God!
On his first day on the job while he was in training. So those kind of things. make me crazy. And that was part of this whole warehousing and logistics. I have done safety audits in the back areas of, I'll call them big box stores for confidentiality. Mm-hmm. And some of the stuff I've seen in there, would curl your hair.
These are the Walmarts, the Targets, the
we'll call them big box stores like that.
Stores.
Yeah.
And again, there's always this pressure of the just-in-time delivery, mm-hmm. which does cause people to move quicker. The supply chain challenges. Oh my God, you've gotten that battery we've been waiting for. We need it yesterday.
Right.
And we've all heard the horror stories about some of these delivery people being told to pee in bottles in their trucks so they're not stopping.
Well, the UPS drivers just went on strike because they said they didn't have air conditioning.
FedEx and UPS have just announced that they're going to merge. The company will be called Fed Up.
Nice.
I like that. That one works. That works. So this
works.
This
is the increased velocity of society in general.
I want to hit something that you mentioned that I think is so critical, and it's kind of become a passion of mine, and that is psychological health on the job, mm-hmm. total worker health. We focus on things like slip, trip, and fall hazards, or getting burned by something, or getting caught in a moving part. But we have a workforce that has mental health concerns, and some of this emanates from COVID. We all know this. And then you add these pressures on top. I have had, a half a dozen cases of people committing suicide on the job. And
or going postal.
Or going postal. I did have a case where one guy picked up a nail gun and shot himself in the head on the job.
Oh my God.
But he could have turned it on the supervisor who was disciplining him just as easily. I had a case in March where at one of the quarries I work with, they came in and a guy had come onto the site while it was closed and jumped off the high wall, fell 50 feet. Now the coworkers tried to retrieve the body. They all have PTSD as a result. Oh. And I've handled over 400 workplace fatality cases. So I've seen the human toll. And this is psychological first aid on the job is something I'm speaking about quite a bit now. I'm a first responder in Delaware, and I head the Delaware BEST team, which is Behavioral and Emotional Support team. I realized that had industrial applications. Mm-hmm. So I'm doing a lot of writing and speaking on that now at conferences, and with organizations around the country. Suicide prevention, is a real challenge, and employers, you guys are out there, I know, you play a role in this. Mm-hmm. You can foster an environment with good mental health. You can, encourage people to get help that they may need. You can have employee mm-hmm. assistance programs and other supports, including medical benefits that cover things like mental health and recovery mm-hmm. programs. Or you can, put blinders on and say, you're here to do a job and that's all we're concerned about. Get her done.
Or consumers who say, I don't care, I want my box of dog bags here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.
Yeah. And so all of this, and the point you talked about, the taggants, the surveillance in the workplace. I just wrote an article on this recently.
Oh, yeah?
I wish I had shared it with you. But, the employers have a vested interest, especially with people, and I think the remote work during COVID started triggering the counting of the keystrokes, and we can't trust employees to work remotely, and that has fostered some really toxic workplace, environments now.
Mitt Romney, who's in the news up in Utah just today.
Yeah.
He didn't tie another dog to the roof.
No, but in a sense, he's trying to do that. He wants people to come back to work in the office, and the reason is because of the real estate value of the buildings is more of his concern because as he's a vulture capitalist and
a vulture,
and he has properties to keep valued, and so. They're saying that there's a 10 to 20% productivity loss with remote workers, and I don't. It doesn't sound like a lot. Maybe it is when in its totality, but on the other hand, maybe that's 10 or 20% margin for mental health for people being able to stay home with their kids because we're all double income earners now. Mm-hmm. It's a whole nother world, and the remote working situation has probably made it possible because childcare is prohibitively expensive at this point.
There are a lot of reasons why the GOP and business
Good. I'm glad you're talking about this.
Don't like remote work, and
Right.
you've hit on one of them. But part of it is that mistrust of workers to be independent, to do their work. Part of it is just I think this idea that you can't benefit workers. It's almost the cruelty is the point kind of thing.
Yeah.
I teach employment law. I mentioned that to you. One of the things that COVID demonstrated to us is a lot of jobs can be done remotely. Well, those are the accommodations for people under the ADA. Once you've documented a job can be done remotely, it's hard to deny that as an accommodation. They also, in 2009, expanded the ADA to include mental health conditions within the coverage of that. And
when you call Southwest Airlines and you speak to a person, very often it's a woman who seems very friendly and relaxed. You know why? Because she's home. And she can take care of her kids. There's no insecurity there. They can be a little happier, a little more contented sounding when you speak to them. Therefore, it's a more positive experience. There are upsides to all of this. But the question I have is that after 40 years of systemic deregulation, from the Reagan era on, has the workplace become more dangerous as a result of deregulation for whatever reasons?
Well, let me say this. There have been a lot of efforts to deregulate, but in the safety and health arena, we really haven't seen as much of a rollback. And where they have tried to do it, and the Trump administration did it on a couple of rules, they got their hands smacked. And the new rules got killed when President Biden came in, and the old rules have been reinstated. In the mine safety area, their workplace exam rule was one of them. The independent contractor definitions, joint employer rules of the National Labor Relations Board. We're now back to the Obama definitions in those.
Oh, good.
Electronic record keeping. The Trump administration fought tooth and nail against the public disclosure of the employer's injury records. They lost. Public citizens sued them, and so they had to make those databases public. But then the Biden administration also reopened that rule and expanded the record-keeping requirements. You're getting more detail now on the injuries. This is important. The business community called it public shaming. The Obama administration, who did that original rule, called it behavioral economics, that you can go online now. If you're applying for a job, you can see what their injury rate is like. You can see if how that compares with the average incidence rate for that industrial sector. They use what are called NACE codes, North American Industrial Classification System. If you're, if you want to be a competitor, you can say, we have a below average injury rate when you're bidding a job, and our competitor, Abrams Construction, they're above average. They've had 3 fatalities. So there's a lot more data mining publicly that can be done now, which is a good way for workers to educate themselves.
How do we rank among other industrialized countries for safety at this point?
We are not great. I mean, we're better than the what we would call the third world, and we were talking about that before we came in here. We're not having 10-year-old kids using arsenic to leach gold here. Or some of the companies that work here own some of those horrible things. But I'll tell you,
I sort of keep breaking in, but I get funny ideas of it. Under the Trump administration, it was called the Turd World. All right. Thank
or you. Whole countries.
Right. That's right. Really.
Yep. And,
that's what he thought of them.
But to your question, and being very serious, because this is a real issue, we are regressive compared with the UK. We are regressive compared with the EU, who operate under the ILO, International Labor Organization codes. They, go with more of a performance-oriented approach to things. Chemical safety, especially. We follow chemical standards to protect workers in this country from the 1960s.
Well, what about these train wrecks? Because they deregulated the trains.
I was at a Federal Railroad Administration hearing when they were arguing, and this was under the Trump administration, to get rid of the extra people on the trains that I know would have
the
been
one
able
person
to prevent some of these.
They wanted to have literally one human being on a 3-mile-long train.
And that's what they were doing. And that isn't how it was under Obama. They rolled back regulations in that area. But chemical safety, let me say this. OSHA's about to come out with a revision to its hazard communication standard, adopting the 7th revision to the Global Harmonization System. Yeah, I know this is geeky stuff. But they're doing that now in 2024 because every other industrialized country adopted that 10 years ago. And when OSHA did its rule in 2012, which was their first GHS rule, trying to bring some harmony around the world to chemical management, that by the time they got the darn by the time they got the darn rule out of the gate, we were already behind. And OSHA's rule is even behind the U.S. EPA and DOT versions of the global harmonization system. So now we're at the cusp. We're going to have this rule. It's already going to be lagging behind. Now, I'm very involved with the International Voluntary Consensus Standards community, we'll call it, ANSI standards, ASTM standards, National Fire Protection Association. Don't ask me how I fell into this from being a DJ.
Phil, you're falling asleep like Trump.
Yeah.
Please try
it's
not
all
to
these
snore.
abbreviations.
They're
putting me to sleep.
But my point is these international consensus standards, they're raising the bar. And these are recognized in other parts of the world. And
what about the unions? What about the unions? There seems to be a nascent union movement in the Southeast. Does that affect safety directly?
Yes, and in fact, and I just did a webinar on this the other day, OSHA passed a final rule that is taking effect May 31st, 2024, so this couldn't be more timely, that allows in a non-union workplace 2 or more workers to request a union person to come into that non-union workplace as their walk-around rep during OSHA inspections. And, of course, the business community is losing their collective mind over this because they think it's going to be assaulting type of thing. There are guardrails. OSHA rules say they can't distribute organizing material. But, if a union rep, say from the operating engineers or the steel workers comes in and they're saying, look at that hazard, look at that, look at that. If you were in a union workplace, you wouldn't have all of these hazards. That can plant a seed. We only have about 15% of workplaces unionized in the U.S.
Really?
I will tell you, again, I've handled over 400 fatality cases and I handle a lot of citation cases. The union workplaces are safer. And of course, any employee out there can notify OSHA if they believe that it's an unsafe or unhealthy work environment. The problem is, though, that there's no OSHA indoor air quality standard. Ironically, this loops back because the very first comments I ever wrote on an OSHA issue were in 1983. When I worked for the Tobacco Institute, and they managed to kill that rule.
But one of the things that's even more exciting for you is that you are a mining expert. Talk about hazardous gigs. It's such a dangerous job, even here domestically. Massey, just briefly explain that, what happened.
Well, yes, the Upper Big Branch mine blew.
Was it West Virginia?
It was in West Virginia, and there was methane. There were a lot of, I'll call it, shenanigans going on. And I will say I've never represented this company. But 29 miners died. And in the end, the CEO, Don Blankenship, was the first CEO convicted under the Mine Act criminally. But the problem is a willful violation resulting in the death of 29 miners, the maximum penalty was 1 year in prison. It's a misdemeanor.
He was convicted of a misdemeanor after 29 of his employees were killed.
Yes.
And a mine had been cited repeatedly.
Oh, the history of it was,
horrendous.
Just... Well,
how does that even make sense?
Well, because the Mine Act reform that has been introduced in pretty much every Congress, for the last 15 years, never makes it to the floor. That would change that. And by the way, you think that's bad. With OSHA, if you willfully commit a violation that results, it's causally connected with the death of a worker, their maximum is 6 months in prison. You get more time for kicking a burro under the Endangered Species Act than you do for willfully killing a worker.
And what is this the result? Is this a result of lobbyists and dark money?
It is, and there is legislation, the Protecting America's Workers Act, that the Democrats have introduced again every session.
Yep.
One of the things in there would change it to a knowing violation of an OSHA rule that results in death or serious physical harm, which right now cannot be criminally prosecuted. That would now be 10 years in prison. It would make it a felony.
Good.
Because I am fond of the mining industry. I've worked in this sector, in large measure since 1989, and I'm a certified mine safety professional. You can do safe mining. You can do healthful mining. You can do environmentally responsible mining if you choose to.
Listen, a mine is a terrible thing to waste.
And it's necessary because of the amount of minerals and metals we need now for the transition to electric vehicles.
Oh, absolutely.
Huge deal.
And we want to be a source. I mean, we don't want to be buying these from other countries and importing them.
Right.
If we have reserves here, we do. We have reserves of lithium. We have reserves of titanium. We
Huge
have
reserves in Salton Sea.
Kryptonite, right.
Uranium. There's
uranium, not
uranium.
I'm not going to get anywhere near it.
I've been in some of, I've been in a lot of these metal mines and
heavy metal.
Heavy metal. I've gone from one kind of rock to the other.
What are the stakes in your line of work come November?
Well, we're either going to have a democracy or we aren't.
Well, there's that.
But it makes all the difference. As we've already discussed, when the Trump administration came in, they rolled back protections to the extent that they could.
Push it back, back.
And some people say, well, we need balance in government. Have a president from one party and a Congress from another party.
Yeah, good luck.
I've been through that, with many years of working around Washington and government affairs. And what happens is nothing gets done, which means we don't get any improvements. We can't, build technology into things. We can't adopt advancements, that we should. And, it's a stalemate. So if we have a Democratic president, whether it's Joe Biden or maybe somebody else, because I'm in that category. I don't know that that either of them are going to make it to November in terms of being on the ballot. There's so much capriciousness out there. So, it could be a real wild card situation. Mm-hmm. But if we have a Democratic president and, House and Senate, we're going to see things like the Protecting America's Workers Act get through. We're going to see judges who I think are going to be, more fair and balanced in terms of reviewing things. Right now, the Republican-nominated judges are intent on rescinding what's called the Chevron doctrine, which is giving deference to the agencies about their regulatory decisions and allowing Congress to substitute their judgment.
My hope is the old man gets reelected. He's got nothing to lose. He increases the Supreme Court to 13 or 15 seats to rebalance it and then create a natural attrition. If you have that many people on board, which would make sense in a society as large as ours with the amount of volume they handle,
so diverse,
it makes sense on so many levels to increase the Supreme Court. And then maybe with a Democratic Congress, with those judges balanced, we could rescind Robert's worst legacy, which is Citizens United. Because without that, it's the only hope we have. I have hope.
There is that, but let me posture another approach to this. The Republicans come in and they expand the Supreme Court. Yeah. So be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
It can blow either way. But
the point
I'm hopeful. I believe in democracy. I believe in the good of people. As we've talked about, I like to embrace the possible.
Right.
And everybody vote.
Yes, everybody vote. Adele Abrams, thank you so much.
Thank you.
What a wonderful line of work you did, and you started in radio. God bless you. You're listening to Phil and Ted's
Sexy Boomer Show.
Sexy Boomer Show.
Sexy Boomer Show.
And we're here every Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and our show can be heard, and all our shows can be heard on our website, on every podcast platform you like, and also at sexyboomershow.com. We'll be back next week. Stay sexy.
Greetings from Glendale.
Woo-hoo.